All right, welcome to section 4.5, the last part of chapter 4 lecture. And these are very long chapters and lectures to cover in just 2 hours that we have in class. So I'm glad that I'm recording these. um, there's a lot of reading, a lot of information that we have to kind of dig into. So let's get started. The learning objectives for this last section are to describe how sensation and perception work together through sensory interaction, selective attention, sensory adaptation, and perceptual constancy, and give examples of how our expectations may influence our perception, resulting in illusions and potentially inaccurate judgments. So this section, I term it the illusion of perception. All right. So how the perceptual system interprets the environment. So we have this perceptual system and we use it to interpret the environment. And our perceptual system is like a supercomputer, and it takes information from all of our senses, our sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, and it makes sense of it, right? No pun intended there. And how it works is that the sensory interaction refers to, again, how our different senses work together, how to create a complete picture of the environment that we're experiencing. So for example, when you taste food, your sense of smell plays a big role in how you perceive its flavor. The brain will combine all of this information from multiple senses, and it gives us this comprehensive understanding of what's happening around us. So imagine another example is like you're watching a movie, and the movie isn't just about seeing the images, it's also about hearing the dialogue, feeling the vibrations from the sound systems, and all of these senses interact to create that rich sensory experience. And again, if it actually happens to be written by a good writer, right, you'll actually connect with the characters and have some effective connection with the movie as well. So those are the best movies. We have something called selective attention. And selective attention is our ability to focus on certain stimuli while ignoring others. So I've heard this used as like not an insult, but as where someone has selective hearing or selective attention as if it's a bad thing. Well, it's an ability. They may be using it at the wrong time, but it's actually useful in some situations. So again, being able to focus on some stimuli, ignoring others, and why the individual is actually doing it, it may be important for the individual to actually ignore certain information. Let's say so a situation won't get more intense. Right. So again, these are abilities. We just use them. We describe them or we perceive them to be good or bad. They are what they are. Again, we have all this information. It's bombarding our senses at any given moment. So we have what's called selective attention, and it'll help us prioritize what's important and filters out all these distractions. Like right now at the moment, if I decided to not focus on this lecture, my computer is making some noise because of the fan. The fan happens to be on right now. I could focus on that. And the more I focus on that fan noise, the more I would get distracted by what my goal is at the moment. Okay. But I can actually come back and focus to this lecture because, well, my example happened to be an example of what we're talking about right now. So here's a good one. Imagine that you're studying in some very popular, busy cafe. I won't say any name brands. And despite having this really noisy environment and people always moving around and people yelling like, so-and-so's drink is ready, whatever, you're still able to concentrate on your textbook if you're one of those types of students who studies at those cafes, because your brain is selectively attending to what you have to do at the moment, and you're kind of blocking all that out. The rest of the stuff is sort of irrelevant to what your main task is at the moment. Right? You can get tunnel visioned. Again, that's not a bad thing. Sometimes you need to. If you have a surgeon who's focused on doing something very critical, and they get this tunnel vision because they're so focused on repairing a particular artery. Well, you want that surgeon to be as focused and attentive and tunnel vision as possible to you know, do that particular surgery perfect. And he's got a whole team of other people worried about everything else around the patient. So it's not a bad thing when people say you have selective hearing, you have selective attention, you're too, I won't say narrow-minded, narrow focused or something. Those are just things that you do, and how you apply them will determine whether it's you applied it well or not. These aren't good or bad things. They just are. And so this goes with our perceptual interpretation of these things. So how our brain makes sense of sensory information by organizing, interpreting it based on past experiences, expectations, and the context of where that's happening. So an individual who's obsessive compulsive, I don't know if you've seen the show Monk. He's a detective, but he's obsessive compulsive, and he worries about these tiny little details. He can't get them out of his mind, and which ends up causing him to get into a lot of situations. But those attention to detail kind of things helps him become a better detective. But let's say he wasn't a detective, and he's just out there doing all these things. Well, he comes off very annoying to people in the TV show. Right, so that's a place where that type of hyper focus is just not conducive to having good social interactions. But again, a surgeon who's like hyper focused on a task of repairing a coronary artery or something, or placing a stent in a coronary artery, and they're hyper focused and they're blocking everything out. You want that trait there. So again, it just depends. The trait itself is not good or bad. It's just where you apply it. So it's up to people to understand the psychology of this and not label these things as good or bad. If you're a mechanic and you have all these tools, and you may think, well, this is a dumb tool, but maybe you didn't know how to use a tool or where to use it, so you keep that tool in your toolbox, and then one day you come across a situation where you think, oh, that tool would be perfect for this. Even though it's not good at this other thing, it's really great for this, and because it has a purpose. And so that's kind of what you should kind of switch your thinking a little bit, or at least open yourself up to that type of thinking, that behaviors may not necessarily be good or bad. It's just like, when do you need to apply this behavior? Everything we do as a human being, some things really are bad. Like some things I just think are extremely bad. I don't see how in anybody's rationale certain things can be excused. But again, that's me. That's where I draw my line. I won't even tell you the things, but everybody has that. So there are certain things that me personally, where it's like, okay, that's my line. That's where I think good and bad definitely exist. But there are a lot of things where I hear people say, well, that's a bad trait. Well, that's a bad this. Like, well, no, these people are really good at this, and that's why they are the way they are. They grew up in this type of environment, and we need people who thrive in that. And so, it's not a bad thing. I mentioned in a different lecture, I had a friend who loved, it's not just fast food, she loved all kinds of work where it was just moving fast, where things just moved. If this person had gone into nursing, this person would have been an ER nurse, because they love things moving. They're just constantly moving, and that's just the way they are. No breaks. Like, for the minute they start work, the minute they end, they just love that rush. And so I don't get that, but they do. And so someone who can't sit still, it's like, wow, this person can't sit still. What, why don't they, what do we do to correct that? It's like, well, no, this person is amazing when they work in a place like an emergency room, because they're operating at that frequency which they're optimized to be content and so forth. And so, yeah, I'm sort of talking about this too superficially, but you get the idea. You get the idea. So there aren't any good, or there aren't. A lot of the things that we consider good or bad aren't good or bad. It's just how you use them. Right? All that stuff we talk about, kids with ADHD, it's like, well, we're considering the behavior that they're exhibiting as good and bad. Is it really good and bad? Does it have a place? Is it useful in any situation? Um, it may not be useful in a classroom where the teacher wants you to sit quietly and not say a word and read a book and have a certain one way of expressing yourself, but maybe that behavior is actually good in other areas. So it's not really good to label those things good or bad early on. Not those things. All right, let's talk about sensory adaptation and perceptual constancy. So sensory adaptation, this is the process by which our sensory receptors, they become less sensitive to constant stimuli. So this is habituation, you might think of it. You know, you get used to something. And what this does, it allows us to focus on new or changing stimuli that may be more relevant. Think about the first time you went driving. And I think everyone kind of experienced this where they say, well, you know, keep your eye on your side mirrors, also keep your eye on the rearview mirror, and also keep your eye on the, you know, the car in front of you. And it's like, well, I only have two eyes, so do I scan constantly like this? And yeah, so if you look at the mirrors, they're just constantly, well, look at this, look at that, look at this. And so it's, it's kind of overwhelming. But then you kind of learn when to look with your peripheral, and you kind of get the hang of it, and all of a sudden all that sensory information is not overstimulating, right? You learn how to just scan and quickly absorb the information and know what's useful and so forth. Actually, I still don't think that's the best way to teach people how to drive, but I think a lot of people were taught like that, and it just kind of bombards you with look at everything all at once. And they kind of, you figure out how to drive on your own later on. And I think we all kind of come to the same conclusion, because I think there's a lot of good drivers out there. It's like, okay, whatever we figured out, I think we should actually at least lay that out in front of someone so they won't be so scared, and so they'll know they'll have a goal of what they're supposed to be when they're a good driver. Let's talk about when you come across something that's like a real strong scent. And this reminds me of an episode in a cartoon, and it had something to do with someone's looking for an apartment, and the apartment is right next to like a place where they slaughter, a slaughterhouse, right? And right, the person smells it right away, but the realtor doesn't, because it's like, oh, they're so used to it. So this is kind of like the example I'm trying to get you to understand. So you walk into a room, it has like a really strong scent, let's say a bakery, and because we're gonna make it a nice smell, and the smell's really noticeable. But after you've been there a while, your nose sort of adapts to that smell, and then you don't notice it anymore. It's not as strong anymore. You can tell it's there, but it's not overwhelming. And this adaptation of your sense of smell to that scent allows you to experience this new scents that are in the room, so you're not overwhelmed by that one scent, right? We have something called perceptual constancy, and perceptual constancy is this ability to perceive objects as stable, unchanging, despite that you have changes in sensory input. So in other words, it allows you to recognize objects and understand their properties even when they appear different, like under varying conditions. So think of changes in lighting or distance of an object, right? But you can still identify the object. So within perceptual constancy, we have what's called size constancy and shape constancy. So size constancy just means that you can perceive an object's size as constant, even if it appears larger or smaller from a distance. I think about those rooms that are designed so that if you look at it from a certain angle, the individual will appear to be like really large, and then another person, again, it'll appear that they're only a few feet away from the other individual. They appear to be very, very small, but in the reality, it's one individual is like super close to you, and one individual is like very, very far back from you. So the room is drawn so it looks more two-dimensional. So they're all standing against a wall, but they're really not. There is actually a three-dimensional component there. Someone's actually closer to you, someone's actually farther away from you, and it gives you this impression that one person is smaller and one person is taller. But your brain knows better, right? Your brain knows that someone isn't, 12 feet tall if someone is 3 feet tall, right? Or 4 feet tall. It's like, well, this person's 3 times taller than the other one because the room makes you look that way. But your brain will perceive that and flag it, basically. Shape constancy, this is when you recognize the shape of an object, like a door. It doesn't matter whether the door is open or closed. Your brain can understand that the shape remains the same, regardless of the position. So in this case, think of you're looking at a door from an angle and you see the door, or you're looking at a door straight on, just say that. And the door opens it up. Let's say a ghost opens it up. And as the door opens up, if you're looking at it straight as if it's a two-dimensional object, right, the shape is going to change. If you were to draw the door when it's fully closed and you're staring right at it, and then when you open the door at 45 degrees, the shape of it's going to be different when you draw it. But you know that the door actually hasn't changed shape. You just know that it moved at an angle, and you understand that its shape is constant, right? So that's what we mean by shape constancy and how we perceive things. And again, we do a lot of these little fun tricks to kind of trick the mind, and they're fun for people to experience. Even though they know that it's a trick, it's still kind of fun to fool your mind. The next thing we're going to talk about is called synesthesia. This is a mixing of senses, and in such a way that experiencing one sensation triggers an experience from a different sense. So it's a perceptual phenomenon. So you got one stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway, and that leads to something involuntary, an involuntary experience in a second sensory or cognitive pathway. So we can talk about like blending or mixing of senses that aren't normally connected. So think of, it says here, grapheme color synesthesia. I'm not familiar with grapheme color. It must be, we should look that up. Anyway, probably not the best time to admit that I've not heard of grapheme. My mind goes straight to graphene, the nanostructure. But grapheme color synesthesia. Seeing letters or numbers as inherently colored. So I guess it comes from the portmanteau, which is just a word that means when you combine two other words together to form one word. That's a portmanteau. Grapheme, that must be one of those words. So you look at the letter A and you always think of red. You look at the number 7, you always think of green. You see there in the picture, Shutterstock, S is associated with yellow, and then like A is associated with white, blue is associated with the small s, and so forth. So every time you think of these letters, you get a color that's also associated with it, even though they have nothing logical connecting the two. So there's also something called sound color synesthesia. There's a documentary about this, which is kind of interesting. And it's not just about this, it's about several types of these types of synesthesia. So this is where you hear sounds or music that triggers the perception of color. So they hear colors or they see sound. I think that's the way they describe it, right? They see sound through colors just like floating in the air. So when they hear music, or when they hear people talking, or they hear birds chirping or something like that. So it's really interesting. It exists, and it's the documentary I had seen talked about it as like some kind of cross wiring. There's something else called taste touch synesthesia. This is tasting food that triggers sensations of touch or texture in the mouth or on the skin. So you get this, and that one's a little more closely related because you do taste texture when you eat something. So for example, I'll bring up menudo. Some of you might not know what menudo is, but it's a beautiful, scrumptious dish soup, right? Made with beef tripe and hominy and everything. So there's a certain type of tripe that I like. It's the honeycomb tripe, and I know what the texture feels like when you eat it, when they use that type. And it's good. I just like it. And there's another one that's like a flat, no texture to it, and it's slimy. And it still tastes the same, but it's just the texture is just, so in this case, taste, texture, I mean, you can kind of combine those, and it's not that far off. But what we're talking about here with synesthesia for touch, it's you associate some kind of touch with a particular taste. And for me, it's that maneuver, but that is an actual, like, I'm actually feeling the texture of the food and stuff. And why is this important in psychology? Well, synesthesia, we think it occurs, again, due to some cross activation, the cross wiring, that's what they said in the documentary, between different brain regions, and they process information. They get information from sensors that they shouldn't, and they process the information as if it's coming from the correct sensors, from the correct pathways. So these are like unique conditions. There's a lot of variety in these types of individuals. Some experience even the same type of synesthesia, but just very mildly. Some get a more intense reaction to their particular condition. They don't consider this a disorder, and it is just like a fascinating way that people experience life. Imagine that you're listening to music. You have a very good ear, and you can hear the different pitches and the tones, and music has like a certain experience for you, and you love it. But imagine that you can also see color when music is playing, and it's very consistent, right? And if you hear violins, you get a certain type of color, and you can expect it to be that all the time. And it's like now the music has this visual that only you can experience because it's very unique to your wiring. Right? I think it's pretty cool. So I don't know if I'd want to experience that, but there might be ways that people do experience that temporarily with psychedelics. There's a lot of research being done with psychedelics today. It doesn't have the stigma that it once used to. Well, actually, it didn't have a stigma at the beginning. Then it developed a stigma, and now we're going back to, oh, there's some useful medical purposes for psychedelics. Let's talk about what this chapter is mainly about, and this is illusions, the illusion of your perceptual experiences. Again, this is where your senses will misinterpret or they'll distort information. And it does this, which leads to a perception that differs from what's actually in reality. So this can occur because the brain will make assumptions, or they'll take shortcuts when interpreting your sensory information. So it can lead to errors in perception. There's the meme where you see like 2 or 3 people and they're standing around an elephant and they're all feeling the same animal, but they all are saying there's something else, right? They're all describing something else that they're touching. That isn't a misinterpretation of sensory information. That's just like an incomplete data, right? They don't have all the information. But you can kind of see how if you can misinterpret something, but not by taking shortcuts. Well, we can say that's taking a shortcut. Instead of feeling the animal all the way around, you just touch a couple of parts of it and you think it's something else. And that would be taking a shortcut, and that'll lead to errors in your perception. But again, in that meme, I think the individuals were blind. Let's talk about visual illusions, right? So in this case, now we can see. And again, this will occur when the visual system misinterprets visual cues, such as like the size, shape, or depth of something. I think, again, this is just my opinion, I think this happens a lot in ghost sightings. People will see something and when the camera's in the right place, you'll see that same illusion, but it could be nothing but that, just an illusion. I watch a lot of ghost hunting shows. So there's an example that includes, we talked about this before, the Muller-Lyer illusion. And this is where you have lines of equal length and they appear different due to the arrowheads. And we discussed no, we did discuss the Pons evolution. No, sorry, we haven't discussed these yet. The Moeller-Lyra illusion, the Pons illusion, the Ponzos where you have two identical lines, they appear to be different lengths. And the only way you can tell is like if you physically measure them on a piece of paper. But when you look at them, your brain is really thinking that they're different lengths of lines, but they're in different points on the paper, and they're actually like oriented differently, so your brain thinks that they're different. You can have auditory illusions, and these involve misinterpretation of sound cues. So, for example, there's something called the shepherd tone illusion, and this creates that perception of this continuously ascending or descending pitch. And it just never actually changes, but it feels like it's constantly getting the pitch is going higher or the pitch is going lower. I recently saw this one on another documentary. It's really cool. Even though you know what's going on, it's still hard to grasp when you hear it. It's kind of giving this weird impression that the pitch is actually going up or the pitch is actually going down, depending on which one you hear. There's something called tactile illusion, and this is an illusion that involves misinterpretation of touch or pressure sensations. So a good example of this is tactile rubber hand illusion. So this is where you've seen this. I think I've seen magicians kind of do this. So you're stroking a rubber hand simultaneously with a person's real hand, and it creates the illusion that the rubber hand is their own. There's another one that we used to do as children, and this is where you grasp your own hands. So you just clasp your hands together and you put your two pointy fingers toward each other. No, I'm sorry. You instead of clasping your own hands together, and you know how you put your pointy fingers together and you point up with both fingers, right, as they're clasped together. You do this, but with someone else's hand, right, your hand and their hand, and you put your fingers together, and then each one of you will rub both fingers, right? So you'll put your finger on your own finger and their finger because they're touching, and you stroke the finger up and down, and it is so weird because you feel your finger. You feel the sensation, the feedback coming from your own finger, the nerve cells telling you, yes, I am touching my finger, I am stroking my finger. As you're looking at the individual's finger and you're stroking it, you are actually feeling some sensation as if you're getting some phantom signal back as you're feeling the other individual's finger as if it's your own, but you're not getting the same sensation on your own finger because it's not really your finger. It's a very weird sensation. Maybe I'll show you all that in class. I forget what that's called. I mean, we used to do it as kids. Thought it was funny. Again, we didn't have Google back then to look these things up. You all can do it. And so what's the importance of all this psychologically? The psychological perspective, the illusions reveal how our perceptual systems interprets and constructs reality, and that's based on limited sensory information. This is probably why I like conspiracy theories, and I like watching the UFO shows, and I like watching ghost stories, because I like to push the limits of what our perception, our perceptual system actually can grasp or not. So it's not just that I like watching ghost shows because I think ghosts exist or don't exist. I'm actually very interested in how the individuals interpret the senses. I've gone to this place called Marfa, where you see these lights and people believe them. They don't know what they are, but some people actually believe they're aliens. And there are lights there. No one can actually explain them. Physicists have been out there and they've tried to measure the wavelengths and all this stuff to try to figure out where they're coming from, and they haven't been able to figure it out. But these lights do show up, and it isn't the lights that actually interest me. It's how people interpret the lights. So this psychological perspective of interpreting illusions of a ghost or lights, which people believe to be are UFOs. I mean, things that actually exist. These are things that actually they're real. They have, you know, they've been observed by many, many people. But we just don't know what they are. And it's like, what is it that people are seeing? What is it they believe they're seeing, and why do they believe they're seeing that? I just find that interesting, this perception. Some people are very convinced that it's UFOs, and others are just there, you know, like a detective trying to figure out what it is, not trying to be biased or anything. Right? So studying illusions helps us understand these limitations of our own perception. And that's probably, if I had to put it in words or definition, why I like shows that are about not just sci-fi, but it's more like fantasy sci-fi, things that are really out there. Like Star Trek isn't one of those. Star Trek tries to be very logical, and it bases its technology on what we think we might have in the future. But then you have these other shows which just tend to be more magical, fantasy kind of thing, where they cross the line of logical conclusions. And I like to see where our sensory fails us and something else could possibly exist. All right, so that's cool. Again, I hope you all find this psychology as exciting as I do. I find every subject exciting, even like history and so forth. Let's talk about this Mueller Liar illusion. More detail in this one. So it's a visual illusion. It involves misinterpreting the length of lines with arrowheads, as you can see there. It's very common. I would say psychological test, but it's a very common illusion. You can Google this, see it on Pinterest and so forth. You see it everywhere. But what it is both lines are actually the same length. It's just that the direction of those arrows, the arrowheads, give you a false sense that they are two different lengths of arrows, right? So one appears longer and the other one, again, appears shorter. The one that appears longer is the one where the arrows are extending outwards, not the arrows, where the arrow's pointing inwards, but it's kind of like it's coming from the outside. And the one that looks shorter is where the arrows are pointing outwards, right? Again, it's an illusion, but they're the same one. The other one is the perception where your system interprets the line with the inward pointing arrows to be like where it's a concave version, as longer as the line that has the outward pointing arrows. What else can we talk about here? Let's see. And that's it. That's it. Okay. So if you look at those two lines in the red, it's the same. It's the same concept with the arrowheads. You know, the one that's like pointing up or open up, it's the same length as the one that's pointing down. And these are really good illusions. I can tell you that they're the same. Some of you won't believe it. You can print this slide out on a piece of paper and get a ruler, measure them both, and you'll prove it to yourself. But it will even still mess with your mind. Right? So the moon illusion. This is something that's common, especially amongst adolescents and children. The moon illusion, it's this phenomenon where the moon appears larger near the horizon compared to when it's higher up in the sky. So even though its physical size remains the same, its physical distance remains the same from the Earth, the perception that the moon is actually bigger occurs when it's at the horizon. This is not to be confused when the moon is actually closer to the Earth. We just experienced that 2 or 3 weekends ago, where the moon did appear to be much, much larger. That's because it was actually closer to the Earth. So there's certain times in the year when this happens. And so, yeah, so it's actually, it does oscillate and it does physically get closer to us. Not a lot, but enough to make visual difference. So not to be confused with that, it's just that this is when you're looking at the horizon, the moon somehow looks bigger. And that has to do with the way the light's being bent at the horizon. It also, the horizon also has a lot to do with the colors that we see in the horizon, the different colors of the atmosphere. And things look pretty red and orange and everything. That's just because the light is going through a lot more particles before it gets to our eyes. So the visual perception, so when the moon is near the horizon, our brain compares it to familiar objects in the foreground. So you're looking at buildings, trees, mountains, and these objects will create that reference point for your sight perception. So we perceive these like foreground objects as large, and our brain interprets the moon in relation to those objects, and it makes it appear larger. And that's all, right? It's an illusion, but a cool illusion. And even though, again, like your mind, I can explain this to you cognitively, but effectively you'll still have this connection, this feeling like it's something still not right. And so changing that affective connection to this illusion is the hard part. I can explain it to you and you could completely understand it, but every time you look at it, your brain will just kind of freak out a little bit. And you have to sort of change that affective trait so that your behavior is more accurate, more appropriate to reality. What else? That's it. We can talk about things intellectually. Scientific explanations. There's several theories to explain the moon illusion. That one includes the apparent distance theory, where the moon near the horizon just seems further away, so we perceive it as larger. And it has to do with the angle of regard theory, where viewing angle affects our perception and affects our perception of size. This may happen to you. Have you ever done a selfie and you're with a friend or they're doing a selfie and you're in the picture and all of a sudden your head looks like, because you're at the wrong angle or you're in front, it looks like you have one of those giant statue heads and their head is like tiny. And then the angle of the picture kind of makes it look really funny. But you know where you two are standing and you know that obviously your head is like 10 times bigger. It's a really weird illusion, especially if you're the person who has the head 10 times bigger. It messes with your mind, and it's like, I don't want that picture. But the other person doesn't really care. It's just you seeing it because it's you. Let's talk about the Ponzo illusion. So the Ponzo illusion is this illusion where you have two identical lines. And they appear to be different lengths due to the presence of these conversion lines or depth cues in the background. So you see that one yellow line in the front and that one yellow line in the back, or orange line, or whatever color that is. I doubt color now. But the lines are actually the same length, and your brain perceives the line placed higher on the image or on the page, on this two-dimensional page. It perceives the image as longer than the line placed lower. It's one of these things that just messes with your mind. You're looking at a 2D object because this is just a flat surface. If you're looking at it on your TV screen or your computer monitor screen or looking at this on a piece of paper, the two lines that actually look like they're converging all the way down kind of gives you the illusion of depth. And so these two lines really look like they're much, much different in size. Again, just messing with your brain. But the reality is you can get a ruler and measure them and they're both the same size. So looking at the psychological perspective of the Ponzo illusion, this looks at and demonstrates that our perception of size and length is influenced by contextual cues, such as depth perception and spatial relationships. So this might be good news for some of y'all. So we know that intellectually, right? We know cognitively the lines are the same length, and our brains still have a hard time interpreting them differently. You just cannot get past the fact that the lines are the same. Now imagine if someone tries to tell you something that you just cannot see and you cannot believe because you think, and let's say you see two things that are different, and someone's trying to explain to you, no, they're the same, and they explain it to you and you actually understand what they're saying, but then you forget the explanation, you look back to the situation, so we're not talking about lines anymore, and you go right back to the behavior that you were doing before because your mind is still being fooled by this illusion. Now the Ponzo illusion is something to do with simple lines, right? And we can actually measure these and prove this to ourselves. But these illusions, like the Ponzo illusion, the Muller-Lyer illusion, they're the basis for a lot of other deceptions that we do to ourselves. So it gets to a point where you're constantly checking yourself and you're wanting to make sure that you are not fooling yourself. What you see is what you actually see. So, which is why I like those ghost shows, because they're so confident that what they're seeing is what they're seeing. Yeah. But so they're living on that edge of illusion perception. They just live there. So it's like, okay, they're living on that boundary. I just kind of want to get to know more about them. A lot of information with where they live their life. Okay, let's talk about the role of expectations in perceptions. Well, expectation actually has a lot to do with your perception. So it's crucial because how we perceive and how we interpret the world around us will influence what we're expecting. And I'll give you some social examples of where this can go good and bad, right? So we have these expectations. They're shaped by our cultural background, our previous experiences, and then our personal beliefs. And where this can actually cause a lot of mishap is that imagine that you're in a social environment with people of the same cultural background, the same experiences, and so forth, and somebody in that group does something that could be considered offensive in the group. Now they don't do it within the group, you're the only one who sees it, and you get offended by it because you think, well, like, we don't do that in this culture. But then you have, let's say, nothing but friends who do that same behavior all the time, and you're completely okay with it, you laugh with it, you join it, and you behave differently in one group versus another because your expectations of this individual in the cultural group, you expect them to be different, whether they're within other members of that group or whether they're just isolated and they're somewhere, let's say, out in town. You have these expectations of their behavior, and when they do something that's, like, let's say, tiny, slightly out of norm, you'll react differently. And that's because you have this expectation of who they should be versus the people who you don't have any expectations with, and they how do we say, they have a lot of leeway to do a lot of things. So you're actually more relaxed and you're having a lot more fun with a particular group versus someone else who is not even going that far that it offends you. So it's very weird how people behave this way. I saw this again on another documentary, and there was an individual in the group who was pegged the nice guy, really nice guy. He actually was a really nice guy. And he was pegged as a nice guy, and so when he tried to be a little playful, they shamed him really bad. And the other guy who was, they were in this experiment together, he just acted like a complete jerk. I mean, he did everything he could to be offensive, and everyone loved him. As where the person he was dressed real nice, he had glasses, so he looked like this really nice person. So he was actually, but he overdid it with the clothing to present himself that way for the experiment. And if he got out of the line, even the slightest, they shamed him really bad. As were the guy who was just out there, a jerk, doing everything. He was embraced. And so it's extremely interesting how people don't have a set of values for you, like that they think you should be sticking to. They have assigned values for how people should behave. So I think that's really interesting. Right? So like I have certain values. Let's say I don't like lying, I don't like stealing, and I just have that of everybody. I don't like people who manipulate and lie and steal to me or to anybody. I don't have expectations for somebody who's in church and it's like, oh, you lied, you steal, and be harder on them than someone who just does it for a living and say, ah, well, that's just who they are. It's like, no, if I don't like this, these are my values and I stick to them. And I'd rather not hang around these people who do that, which are, let's say, against my values. But in the documentary, the values that the individual expressed depended upon the individual they were talking to. So, meaning they had no values of their own, right? Their values were actually completely dependent on other individuals. And so the guy who was like a real nice guy, I try to understand this. So it's like he symbolizes something, right? Some stability. And as long as he's there and he's quiet and he's nice and he's stable, a certain part of the group will be okay because something makes sense, and then it allows them to experiment and play out in the fringe, which can be dangerous for them. But if the nice guy is doing all that dangerous stuff as well, or even hints at going that way, their world destabilizes. Again, this is just my observation, my opinion. This is not like they didn't talk about this in the documentary at all, but I tried to analyze it, and it's like this person or these group of people, because it was more than one person, their values, their experience through life, continually was dependent upon other people. They had no stability of their own. That's the best way I can explain it. So they latch onto other people's behaviors so long as everything is compartmentalized within a group. Like you're the stable one, you're the designated driver, you're this, you're that. And I can understand if it's a designated driver, right? You see the designated driver having a sip of alcohol. He's like, well, no. You're the designated driver. You can't be drinking because we're all drinking. Something like that, right? But to assign values, not a role as a designated driver. That's a role where somebody's keeping everyone safe. But to assign behavioral values to another individual, and if they cross that, it becomes an issue where the activity itself isn't the issue. It's complicated. This is not a complex situation. Complicated means that you have two different outcomes for the same criteria. Right? Complex just means that in engineering, complex just means that you may have multiple criteria, but it all leads you to the same outcome. Right? So like the complex mousetrap, right? Eventually, its main goal is to catch the mouse, and that's a complex system. But a complicated system is unreliable. It's unstable. It gives you different outcomes. It has different expectations, and it's it's interesting that people live their life that way. I just think that's interesting. So again, I've been talking for way too long, but hopefully some of this stuff will help you connect these illusions of perception to the topic for chapter 4. So we can look at how our desires affect our preferences. So our desires do affect our preferences. They shape what we notice and how we interpret sensory information. If you have someone who loves music, They may pay more attention to auditory cues in the environment than someone who is less interested in music. We can talk about motivation, right? What are the goals and motivations that influence what we pay attention to, how we interpret information. So think about when you're hungry. You may perceive food-related cues more prominently in your environment. Everything makes you hungry when you're hungry. And again, just your emotions. And I didn't actually cover all of these because I went on a side story. But your emotional state can bias your perception, right? It gives you an illusion that you actually think or you're feeling what you're feeling, but it's actually biasing it. So when you're fearful or you're anxious, you can perceive harmless things as threatening, but they're actually harmless. So that's a definite indicator of someone who's acting very emotionally. We can call that emotionally unintelligent, and I'll just link that to neuroticism, someone who's very neurotic. So positive emotions, on the other hand, they enhance our perception, and they'll make stimuli more pleasant versus threatening. Again, just looking at the context of which you receive these stimuli. Okay. Hopefully I covered everything. I may have gone too much into that documentary story. This is an interesting one, perceptual set, right? So a perceptual set, this is, it's a set that has a predisposition or has this mental framework, and it shapes how we perceive and how we interpret the information. So it's designed to influence our expectations, our attention, and how we interpret the stimuli. This is used a lot in commercials. And I don't want to say it's used to manipulate, but again, commercials are used to manipulate, or to get you to do something that you or move you in the direction that you probably wouldn't normally move to. Again, this is all conducted to try to link your past experiences, put something in a different context, maybe even add some cultural factors that will help you, not help you, but will push, that would lean, that would cause you to perceive one thing over another. That's as generic and as honest as I can be without getting too specific. Any more specific, and I would be bordering something that could be false. There you go. So in psychology, unless I'm doing research and I'm actually gathering the data and I'm actually observing something firsthand, I will try not to give you these generalizations. Or again, I'll speak about a documentary and the specific situation that I saw, or something that I've experienced. But again, I try not to make these generalizations because they can be misleading. Right? Sometimes you get them right, best by coincidence. It's not like you base it on research or science. You just happen to be, you guessed one right. So if we look at the image here, right, you have one with a duck. You have another one with a small dog, a dog with a small duck on its head. And then depending on your perceptual set at that particular moment, you might initially perceive the image as either a duck or a dog. It's kind of a hard one to explain. If your perceptual set is primed to expect images of animals, let's say that are commonly found in a pond, like ducks, you might first interpret the image with the duck on the dog's head as a duck, like the whole picture just kind of feels like a duck to you. But on the other hand, if your perceptual set is primed to expect images of dogs, but in these three sets, we only have one dog in the middle and two ducks on the side. So you might first interpret it as a dog with something unusual on its head. So you get the idea? What you notice first from this set, the dog or the duck. And for me, I can tell you when I look at this picture, I still, even though there's two ducks on the side, there's a duck on the head of the dog. My first perception, I'm primed for the dog because I just have a dog, and I'm constantly dealing with a dog. So when I see a dog, I'm primed to kind of look at the dog first. If I didn't have a dog, it would probably be a different story where I didn't have any bias toward either one. We have a park that has ducks. Again, if I didn't have a dog and I frequent the park a lot more often, the pond, and I used to go feed those ducks, I would probably look at this picture and be primed to notice the ducks first. And I would say, hey, it's a duck and it's on top of a dog. Versus, hey, there's a dog with a duck on top of his head. So you kind of get the idea with the perceptual sets and how it causes us to look at, let's say, the order of how we would process information in an image. And that's where we're going to end today. A whole nother hour. These lectures do take a long time, and I have not been doing a lot of side conversations. They just do take this much amount of time. So the takeaways here, this is one slide, and we got one more slide with takeaways. I'm just going to stop here. You can pause it and read them. This is the last takeaway for this particular section, 4.5, which is the last section of this chapter. And with that said, thank you very much for enduring this very long lecture. I hope you found it as exciting as I did. And as again, being an engineer, this stuff is extremely enlightening, especially when we're talking about the special receptors and the transduction of those signals into something that the body can understand. This is the exact same thing we do in engineering, but in this case, our body is engineered, and we engineer things. Okay, I'll stop there. I want to thank you for your time. The next time I talk to you, we will be covering Chapter 5. Enjoy.